Who told them that was the priority? The meeting has already moved on. A project has been delayed. A budget has been redirected. A team has reorganized this week. No formal decision was announced. No one remembers hearing clear instruction. But everyone in the room can explain why they believe they were doing the right thing. They responded to what leadership emphasized. What leadership repeatedly asked about. What received attention. What went unchallenged. What was left unsaid. Nothing appears broken. The team is working. People are making judgment calls. Deadlines are being met. But the organization has started answering questions leadership never formally settled. The silence didn't remain empty. Someone interpreted it. There was a time when less needed to be said. The room was smaller. The people were closer to the leader. Context traveled informally. A glance could redirect the conversation. A brief comment could carry enough meaning because everyone understood what sat behind it. Then responsibility changed. The organization added people. More decisions began happening beyond the leader's immediate view. New managers inherited partial context. Teams began operating across different rooms, schedules, locations, pressures. But the operating assumption remained that people understood, that priorities were obvious, that everyone knew what mattered most. It starts showing up in ordinary moments. Senior leader says, I thought we were focused on retention. A department head responds, we were told growth was a priority. No one was necessarily told either one. They watched where questions were directed. They noticed which numbers received attention. They remembered which concerns were acknowledged and the ones which disappeared after the meeting. Teams do not wait indefinitely for a direction. They interpret it. They rank priorities based on what appears to carry consequence. They decide which standards are firm and which ones become flexible under pressure. They learn what leadership will tolerate. They learn what requires approval. They learn what can be done quietly without reopening the conversation. The hidden cost accumulates. One team protects speed, the other protects quality, one leader protects revenue, another protects relationships. Each one of them believing they're protecting the organization. And each decision makes sense inside the interpretation of what it produced. The same conversation starts returning. Why are we still unclear about this? Why are they making decisions without us? Why does every department seem to be operating from a different priority? And all the answers sound operational. Communication, operation, follow through. But beneath those explanations, the organization has been making decisions in the space leadership left open. The leader remains present. Meetings still happen. Messages still go out. But presence is not the same as declaration. And repetition is not the same as definition. Eventually, interpretation begins hardening into routine. Routine becomes expectation. Expectation begins shaping behavior, and behavior begins functioning like policy, even though no one remembers approving it. What has your organization already decided because you would not? Someone will begin with a recent decision, not a major one. Perhaps a vendor approve, a position left vacant, a client exception granted, a project delayed. Now, someone would ask, when did we decide that? No one would have a clean answer. They would remember conversations, the comments, the signals, something that the leader seemed concerned about, something that the board did not object to, something that became easier to continue than to question. There will be stories about recurring meetings. Same issue returns. People discuss it carefully. Everyone acknowledges the tension. No one states what now governs. The meeting ends, and by the next week, the team has made practical choice. Not because they were careless, because the work still had to move. And someone would admit, we've been operating this way for months. Another one would say, I assume that's what leadership wanted. Someone else might quietly realize, we actually never said that. Organizations normalize what remains unchallenged. And a temporary workaround becomes standard practice. A one-time exception becomes precedent. A leader's silence becomes permission. A delayed decision becomes distributed decision. And teams adapt around this. They become more cautious in some places, more autonomous in others. They learn which questions are unlikely to receive a direct answer. They stop bringing some decisions forward. They begin resolving them closer to the work. Now, sometimes it looks like initiative. Sometimes it looks like fragmentation. And from inside the organization, the two can be difficult to separate. No one will call it leadership by silence. They will call it empowerment. They will call it flexibility. They will call it letting the team work They will call it micromanaging. Every explanation could be sincere. And still, the organization would be living inside decision leadership never made out loud. The cost becomes visible in coordination. More clarification. More exceptions. More meetings. More meetings to reconcile decisions that were individually reasonable, but collectively incompatible. Nothing collapses. The organization simply becomes harder to govern. Now, no decision has to be announced during this particular episode. No priority has to be restated. No meeting has to be rescheduled. Just notice what people already learned from what was not said. Notice what interpretations now move without permission. Notice what becomes normal without ever becoming explicit. And notice whether the decision still feels unmade, or whether the organization has already been living inside it.